So this was one of my early projects in Blender. Once I started to try to get into the rigging side of things on Blender, uh, so I spent a lot of time, and the initial thing was fairly simple. And so this is one of the early rigs, just so I could get used to the skin weighting process. I built this, and so now I want to update this a little bit to make it a bit easier to post things out. So I had a basic IK setup on this originally, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to basically convert this to something that I came up with that will help me to post things a bit easier and add a little more control to the legs that I needed when I was setting up poses. So the first thing in Blender, in Maya, you could create layers and throw things in layers to separate things out, make certain things visible and certain things not. Blender has a lot of that too, but it has something called collections that it uses. So Blender has these collections that you can create. So it's pretty simple. What you can do for this is by default, when you first create an armature, it'll already have a default bone layer or bone collection set up for it. But once you actually have a lot of different bones in there, and by the way, they call them bones in Blender instead of joints, even though they basically perform exactly the same task. But in Blender, you have a lot more flexibility when it comes to the usage of bones. And I'll get into that in a second. But when you're setting up your collections, it's fairly simple. You basically just select the bones that you want to be within a collection. And so I'll select all the ones for the legs, for example. And you pretty much just come over to collections and you just click on the plus. And by the way, this is going to be when you have the skeletal structure selected or the bone selected, you go to the little data point that was a little skeletal guy under properties here, and it'll bone collections is going to be one of your pull downs here on the right. If this is where you have your panel, you can change the position, of course. Uh, and so it'll usually be the only thing in the list under bone collections. And you can rename everything in the list, which I've done already just to make it clear what it is. Now, if I want to add a bone collection for my legs, all I have to do is hit plus, and then you see you get a new bone group, and I'll call it legs, right? And then while I still have those bones selected, I'm going to click on assign. And it assigns the legs to that collection. But you also want to go up to your original or your main collection, and you want to remove them from that collection. So as you can see right away on the screen, it's already hidden our legs because we don't have that collection active. Once I activate that collection, now we have it visible, and I can disable the main collection or hide the main collection so I don't have to look at it. So just a little way to cut down the visual clutter while you're working, even though all of the hierarchy and the relationships between the bones are still intact. And as you can see on this one, I also still have my root bone still active, which is fine for now. All right, so moving on. Let's talk about setting up our IK. So I want to create a sort of an IK stretchy system, which is actually much easier in Blender than it is in Maya, because in Maya you usually have to create a very complex system using multiple joints, constraints, and lots of things like that. You do something similar here in Blender, but a good portion of it just comes down to changing a few settings here and there, and you'll see what I mean. It's fairly simple. Okay, so first of all, with my collection, my bones, I'm going to change them into a different mode. In this case, where it says under the properties for my armature, I'm going to go down to viewport display. If you expand that, if you don't have it open already, just click on the arrow, expand it. And it says display as this one right here, which basically just shows us these little triangles and spheres. Basically, it shows them like the joints appear in Maya, for example. So I usually switch this to B-bone. Why B-bone? For one, B-bone is going to give us a few more options when it comes to displaying our bones. and manipulating how they appear. Even though later on we can set these up to actually have controllers, uh, but right now we're just going to focus on using B bones as is. And this is because when we start making changes, it's going to be easier to sort of see them happen here than if we were using this standard bone, the default bone mode. Okay, so I'm going to switch into wireframe mode. And don't forget, if you're in Blender, that's just Shift Z to switch it to wireframe mode. Or you can also just click on this little button up here, a little sphere, that's a little wireframe in the upper right hand corner. So by default, I've got my thigh, my knee bone here, got my ankle, my ball, and I've got a few toe joints here. I'm actually going to add an extra joint here. I'm going to call that my toe root, and I'm just going to do E for extrude, and just extrude all on the y-axis here, just a little bit. And we'll select that bone down here, and I'll rename that as my toe root dot left. And don't forget, you always want to name things according to their position on the body when it comes to left and right so that you can actually mirror things across easily. And that includes updating any constraints and relationships. All those things will mirror with the bones when you mirror them. So it's actually very handy. And so in this case here, I also want to take this bone right here. I'm going to right click and I'm going to make sure that it's disconnected bone. When it's a disconnected bone, that means it's still parented to the bone ahead of it in the hierarchy, but that it's not physically connected to it. So you actually have a little more flexibility when it comes to animation. You could actually translate that bone away and still have it fall within the hierarchy without physically trying to stay attached to the other bone. So it comes in very handy when you want to also translate and rotate to change the performance or to even distort the mesh in a way that wouldn't necessarily be possible if it was still physically attached to the end of the previous bone. So I'm going to select my thigh and my knee, and I'm going to Shift D to duplicate. And then I'm going to use something called bone scale, which is under armature and transform and scale bone. And so that's Alt X for me. You can see it's under armature and transform. And so that allows me to actually differentiate between the bones I just duplicated and the ones that are already there. Okay. And so now with my new bones, I'm also going to go in and I'm going to rename them right away. It's important to rename things as soon as you create them, just so you can keep track of where things are and you don't have to go back and rename things later. It also helps to reduce the confusion for yourself. Blender will automatically rename things, usually with adding an additional number at the end or incrementing that number up as needed. But I like to have specifics so it's easier to keep track of what's what. Now, I'm also going to do the same thing with the bones in the foot here. Shift D. I want them to duplicate in the place over there, and Alt X so I can scale them up. And so now we have those. Now, I'm going to take all these bones that I just created, and under armature, I'm going to go to bone settings and choose deform, and I'm going to set the type to disable. Now what I'm doing is I'm disabling their ability to affect or influence the skin in any way, because I don't want them to actually control, have an influence on the weighting at any point. Even though my mesh is already skin, if it wasn't, I wouldn't want these bones to have any impact on the deformation of anything within the character. So now I'm going to take the 3 bones in the foot and I'm going to actually flip them, flip their orientation, their direction, flow. So that's just Alt F on the keyboard. And I believe you can also do that up here somewhere. Can't remember. Ah, switch direction right there. Okay, so I basically just switched the direction of, so now they're flowing up this way. And I'll need that just for how I'm going to set up the controls for it in a second. Okay, so if I switch this into pose mode, you can come in, you can see that now these bones rotate in the opposite direction versus how the bones and the foot rotate. And that's fine because I need it for the setup that I want. So I'm going to go back to edit mode. And I need a couple of more joints here. So I've already got a joint here for the knee aim, and I've got one for the leg aim. If you didn't have these, you could easily go in and just select essentially the pivot of the knee, and you could just extrude out along the y-axis, select it, clear parent, and then just move it out along the y-axis to the position you want it in. And then you could either parent it to your root, or you could hold off and parent it to another bone that we're about to create here, the foot bone. So I don't need this bone because I already have one. And I already have one for my leg as well. You do the same thing for this control. You select the joint near the ankle and then extrude out. And you want to leave the pivot for this one though aligned with the ankle, while the one for the knee aim you want to pull out. Okay, so now I need to create a couple more bones. So I'm going to select this one, going to duplicate, and then I'm just going to pull this one straight down. And I'm going to the z-axis, set to 0, and z-axis tail, so cut to 0. And this is so it aligns perfectly with our ground plane. And I'm just going to nudge the tip of that back a little bit, and then use my bone scale to make that a little bigger. Okay, so now that's going to basically align perfectly with our leg control. And I'm going to Shift D that one a couple more times, bring it forward. And in this case, I'm going to my side view. And I'm going to align this basically with the bottom of the furthest toe out. And I'm going to duplicate it again. I'm going to pull this one back and align it with the heel, basically. And so for each one of these new joints that was created, you want to rename them. So thigh IK, and I'll call this one my knee IK left. And this one, I'm actually going to change the name a little bit. It's not going to be controlling anything related to the IK, but it will be controlling my roll for the ankle. So when it rolls up, relative to the ball. Okay, so it's my ankle roll. This is going to be my ball roll, which is going to basically roll up relative to the toes. And then this one is going to be my toe root roll, which is mostly going to act as an anchor to prevent the toes from displacing when the ball roll goes up. But you could also use it to roll in some capacity as well. Okay. So another thing we're going to do is we're going to take the root of our toes, and since we did create another joint here within the hierarchy of the foot, we're going to parent and keeping offset the roots of each one of these toes to my toe root. And that's so that when this control moves, it also controls this one, which therefore controls this one. And when this rolls, instead of the toes rolling with it, they will stay relative to the toe root. Okay, so now we've created some new bones here, and that's going to be my toe roll, that left. This one's going to be my heel roll, dot left, and this is going to be my foot roll. Actually, it's not going to be a roll at all. This will just be my foot control. Okay, and notice everything .l for .left. And I'm using .l because that's one of the suffixes that Blender will recognize when you're doing symmetrize, and it will automatically rename everything that it mirrors across, which is very handy and speeds things up nicely. So with each one of these node bones, now we need to adjust the hierarchy a little bit. So I'm going to take my toe root, or the toe roll specifically, and I'm going to parent it, keeping offset, to the toe roll, and take the toe roll and parent that, maintaining offset, to the heel, and then the heel to the foot. Again, parenting, maintaining offset. And so this is so that when the foot control moves, it moves the entire foot. When the heel rolls, it rolls the rest of the foot, but it doesn't touch the foot control because the foot's control of everything. And of course, when you're going to take the toe, it rotates your foot up that way. Okay, and of course you can also twist it relative to that as well. Now, a couple of things when you're creating these new joints, it's a good idea to go through each one of them in edit mode and make sure that the roll is zeroed out for your new joints, just so they're using basically the default global orientation, or an orientation that's relative to the joints they're going to control. Okay, so all of these are in a good position. All of the orientation matches, relatively speaking. Now, for the leg and our knee, usually I will take these and completely zero them out. So again, they're global. And you can do that by simply selecting them in edit mode and then pressing Alt-R, which will basically zero out the roll. You can also do it by adjusting your roll here to, if you want to clear the roll, or which is basically what I'm doing with Alt-R. Okay, so you have a few options there to control the roll, and you can just manually type it in as well. A couple of different options there. So now we got our basic hierarchies. Now we need to take the leg IK control here. Don't really need to make this one bigger at all, but I do need to take it and I'm going to parent it to the top of my foot so that when that foot rolls up, it will lift the leg up relative to its displacement or deformation. Okay, so we're all set there. And actually, did I remember to disable? I did not. Okay, so there are a few joints here I still need to disable deformation on, so let me just do that really quick. So when you're duplicating joints, even there's no deformation on the source joints, sometimes it will just toggle it on by default. So just remember to check the settings on that. So again, deform, toggle that to disable. And again, I'm doing this because the joints that I already have are the ones I want to control the mesh, and these bones I'm creating now are basically going to be controls for the bones that are already controlling deformation. Okay, so now I have my bones set up the way I want them to behave within the hierarchy. Now I just need to set up a few things. I need to set up the IK, I need to set up the stretch. So I'm going to do Shift I, and then without targets. And so that adds that in there, and I go to target and I choose my armature. And you can have multiple armatures within one scene, and this is why you can choose different armatures. Let's say you had an accessory or additional prop that you're rigging alongside your main character. You could always have multiple armatures in there, or you could even rig different parts of your character at different times by creating separate armatures and then combining those armatures later. So in this case, I need to find my leg IK. So I'm just going to start typing leg until we get our IK. Okay, and that pulls that in there. And then I need the pole vector target, which is going to be from the same armature. And then I need to find my knee aim. And so there we go, knee aim left. Okay, now what happened here? What happened here is I didn't specify the chain width, like how far are these, is this IK going to influence it? It's only going to influence two bones, the knee and the thigh. So that way it doesn't try to control the entire egg. Okay. And so that snapped right back. And let's see, one more thing. We've got our pull vector in there. Everything looks okay so far. And so let's do a quick test. Now, as you can see, the leg twisted a bit there. And that happened when I added the pull vector. Didn't see it because the foot's not following yet. So what we can do is we can go to pull angle. And usually this is going to be something like -90 to rotate it forward again. And what you can also do is to check for any sort of snapping in it later, is you can toggle between edit mode and pose mode. And that way you can see there's actually a little bit of a snap here, which means the pull vector angle is a little bit off, probably because the orientation of the legs has a slant on the leg there. And that's easy to fix. All you have to do is select the bone with the pull vector, and you basically you can toggle it back and forth. Very slight pop. And you basically just need to readjust the orientation a little bit until that pop goes away. And see it's almost completely gone there at around 88.3. And by the way, to actually show the pivot of the bones, under the data points and under viewpoint display, you can just activate axes, and that way it'll show you the pivot location for your bones. Comes in very handy. Okay, so now we've got our basic IK in place, and we need a couple other things here. So what we want to do is we want this IK chain to control the rotation of the FK bones. Okay, so I'm going to select my thigh, IK, select my FK beneath, and I'm going to Control Shift C and just tell it to copy rotation. And that's it. That simple. Copy rotation. So now, when I translate my foot up, it lifts the leg. That simple. And if I want to set up a little stretch, I need to select my AK leg, and I'm going to go in and shift select the FK as well, just like that. And again, Control Shift C, stretch 2. And if we go over to our bone constraints, we'll see we have the copy rotation, and then we have the stretch 2 constraint on our FK. One thing we want to do is set the volume variation to something like 0.1 or even 0 if you want to. So that when it stretches, it basically will give us some volume change, but not something drastic. With that set at 1, it usually goes a bit too far. So I'll show you what that looks like. If I translate the leg down, as you can see, it's scaling the entire leg and the foot, everything like that. Now, usually when it comes to the foot, I will go into the bone for the ankle, and I will go to the inherit and set it to none for the scale, so that it doesn't scale the foot all when we actually stretch it out. Simple fix for that. Okay. Another possibility is to completely change your hierarchy so that maybe that ankle joint is parented directly to the IK leg bone, but I'd rather keep the FK hierarchy altogether, especially if I'm going to add an IK FK switch later. Okay, so now we've got that set up, but we still need to set up control for our roll bones here, as you can see. And we've got our stretch in place now. As you can see, the mesh is stretching nicely. So now we just need to finalize things. And this is actually fairly simple. It's going to be exactly the same thing we did with the leg, except for we have a little problem here. The orientation of our FK joints, or FK bones, is completely the opposite of those controlling them. But that's actually pretty easy to fix too. So, copy rotation. As you see, it flips around. Oh no, flip around. Just select the bone that flipped, go to bone constraints, And let's go to target and say local with parent, local with parent. Boom, there you go. Flips it around. So now it basically just tries to align both source and target. Fairly simple. But there is still a slight problem. There's an orientation issue because as we did flip the orientation, if you rotate on the Y, you'll see that they're rotating in the opposite direction. So simply select your OK and just tell it to invert the input there, and that's not a problem. And we also have to do the same for our z-axis in this case. Okay, and so now it follows. It's going to be a little different with the other joints because once the angle changed, the influence changed a little bit. The orientation is a little different as well because I think it flips the z-axis when you hit down the chain here. But it's basically the same process. Select select your roll bone, select your FK bone, Control Shift C, and copy rotation. The Y, you're always going to have to adjust. Target to local with parent, owner to local with parent, flips it around. But in this case, usually it's the x-axis that you're going to have to invert. Pretty much just test your roll and pay attention to what the FKs are doing. Test each axis to make sure it's actually following correctly. It's fairly simple. And everything's working. Okay. So once again, same thing again. Control Shift C, copy, local with parent, flip your Y, and in this case, flip your X, and then test. Rotate, rotate, and rotate. Okay. And so now if we test things out, let's say if I want to roll the ball, got our foot roll there, no problem. Roll up on the toes, keeping the toes flat. Good. Roll at the toe. No problem. Roll on the heel. And of course, rotate our foot. And we're good. Now, of course, last but not least, now that we have everything working on this side, we still need to get it working on the other side. And that is actually a fairly simple thing to do. Switch to edit mode. Select all of the bones on that left side. We don't really need this one right here. Ah, I forgot one thing. Still got to set up my hierarchy. I forgot to set up my hierarchy for this one. So I'm going to take my my knee aim, and I'm going to parent it directly to the foot here. Keep maintaining offset. You could also do it to your root. It depends on how you want to do it. Usually though, if I'm moving everything else away from the root, I will keep the knee associated with the foot. And I think that should be it. Although I'm going to take my foot, I'm going to parent that, maintaining offset. I'm going to parent that to my root here. So that if I move my root, everything maintains relative alignment. Okay, so now I'm going to select all of my bones here, right click and choose Symmetrize. And if you watch carefully, you'll see that it will mirror everything across to the right leg from the left. Okay, so everything's mirrored. And if you can check your bone names, you'll see that we've got our right foot and our right roll, and everything's mirrored perfectly. And if you check our behavior, that should also have been mirrored perfectly. And as you can see, I have an extra bone here, and that was from the original rig. And so I'm going to basically just delete that extra bone. Okay, so yeah, if you already have bones on the other side that may have completely different names, it will create brand new bones based on the ones that you're mirroring across, which is nice. Um, just make sure that that doesn't negatively impact anything within your weights. And the great thing about Blender is you can easily rename all of your bones and it will update your skin weight names to reflect that. And then you can basically go through and make any major changes to your rig like so. And so as you can see, the legs are stretching nicely. And we've got our IK sort of gooey like stretch going on with minimal effort.